A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, wherever you might be, and a warm welcome to the 5th edition of our newish show, The3Ms, abbreviated to The3Ms, the show where we peel back the layers of misunderstanding and misinterpretation that lead to misinformation. My name is Ian Ingalls, and I shall be your host. I'm joined, as usual, by my two fellow China expat experts, Jerry Gray and Fernando Munoz. Good evening, gents.
And a very good evening to you.
So, as ever, I shall pose questions to Jerry and Fernando on various topical and ongoing news stories about China. In our previous shows, we discussed the US Congress's Uyghur Policy Act, China's much-rumoured social credit system, as well as China's impending collapse. Just for a bit of context, the three of us have all been living here in China for many decades and have had many different experiences of both life and work in different parts of the country, which is something that many representatives of Western mainstream media cannot claim to have had. So this week, gents, I'd like to change tack somewhat and address a couple of questions that the likes of us three are asked or perhaps accused of ad infinitum. Living in China for such a long time and voicing what some might interpret as pro-China opinions, it is often suggested that we must be associated with, say, the Chinese government, that we can only be stooges for the authorities or on the payroll of the Communist Party of China. Otherwise, why would we bother to have these discussions? Obviously, the motivation of wanting to present an accurate, or at least not a false or misleading picture of China to the world based on our own personal experiences is seldom entertained. There has to be a more sinister motivation, or indeed one driven by money. With this in mind, then, I would like to start by asking you, Jerry, whether you have ever been a member of the Communist Party.
Wow, big question. I'm British born and I hold an Australian passport. I can join the Communist Party of Britain, the CBB, which does exist. The Communist Party of Australia was banned, first of all, in 1940. It re-emerged as a party a few years later. But then it was dissolved, and I'm not exactly sure what happened, but it was dissolved in 1991 and has since reformed as the AUSCP, the Oz Communist Party. And it seems the Anglo world doesn't like communists very much because the US government in 1954 banned them too, with the Communist Control Act. And this has never been tested in the Supreme Court and would probably be overturned now as a First Amendment breach if it were. But for now, it's a fact that in the USA, it's tolerated but still technically illegal to be a member of the Communist Party. But it's not illegal to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, people think that China will invade Taiwan, but they can't. They really can't. Experts criticize China for having this strategy, but with the wrong equipment. What? They say China wants to invade Taiwan because it's what they would do if they were thinking about the same circumstances. But then they criticize China. This is the real experts, people who understand defense, criticize China for not having built the right ships. These ships they've got can't carry enough troops for a land invasion, not realizing it's their own flawed logic that the invasion is never going to happen, rather than China's lack of foresight on planning an invasion. China has never planned an invasion and doesn't have the equipment to do it. Simple as that.
Well, what about you, Fernando? South America is known as a hive of leftist activity. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
The short answer to that is no. There is something called the Partido Comunista Colombiano, or the CCP for its acronym in English, but I'm not a member. In fact, I hated them for so long, and I should explain why with a bit of history about the movement. The CCP, the Colombian one, was founded in 1930. But by 1964, there was a guerrilla group called the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, or the FARC, which emerged as the armed forces of the CCP, the Colombian one. Their fight and their struggle was supported by many people, but then came the 80s and the 90s when the very evident affiliation between FARC and drug dealers meant that the CCP, the Colombian, saw it necessary to part ways and remove their political support for the FARC back in 1993. But the damage was already done, and communism in Colombia, as such, lost its footing and the support from workers, students, and academics for almost 2 decades. However, right before that split, the CCP founded a party called the Unión Patriótica, or Patriotic Union, a political party that was subject to the most atrocious violence, the ones that you cannot imagine. They were targeted, of course, by drug traffickers who felt betrayed at that point, the paramilitaries, and security force agents, all throughout the 80s and 90s. And that led to their eventual decline. The virtual disappeared as a party and their extermination of their leaders in the late 1990s. They were really unable to shake off the stain of the FARC. And, well, that was communism up until then. However, in 2013, the Patriotic Union recovered legal status, and the state recognized what had happened to them as actual political genocide, real genocide, the one with photos of party members being assassinated and whatnot, not those fake genocides that. Anyway, now there was another infamous guerrilla group in Colombia that probably you have heard of, the M19, or the Movimiento 19 de Abril. The M19 was the second largest guerrilla group in Colombia, and perhaps, if you're old enough, you remember them also as the group that executed the siege of the Palace of Justice in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and the actual kidnapping of high court judges on November of 1985. Some people say, and there's evidence to this, that this was done at the behest of Pablo Escobar in order to impede his cases in Colombia and to obstruct a vote to institute extradition with the US in Colombia. Once a truce was actually signed in 1990, they became a political party called the M19 Democratic Alliance, and a man called Carlos Pizarro León Gómez emerged as one of the most charismatic leaders in the whole country, and he was set to win the presidency of Colombia in that year. He literally looked like El Che Guevara. He was just amazing to listen to. But on April 1990, Pizarro took a flight from Bogota to Barranquilla during that presidential campaign, and a hitman had boarded the plane, and in mid-flight, he took a submachine gun out of the bathroom, magically found his place there, and killed him. So, look, communism in Colombia, they've made a lot of mistakes, and they have fought very hard to get back on track, which they actually did. If you look at 2022, the Colombian presidential elections, the CCP, the Colombian one, supported Gustavo Petro. He was actually a former M19 militant and leader, and in that year, he was elected as president of the Republic of Colombia. Now, in addition, the leader of the CCP, the Colombian one, Ms. Gloria Ramirez, is now the Minister of Labor in Colombia. So, as a Colombian citizen, I really want what's best for my country. And I am really sure that closer ties and cooperation with China are the way to achieve all this. But to answer your question again, no, I'm not a member of the CPC, nor of the CPC of China.
Well, thank you very much for that little insight into the history of the left in your home country. So you claim never to have been members of these parties, but have you ever been associated or affiliated to these parties in any way? Or indeed to the CCP? Jerry?
I told you, I'm British born. I'm an Australian citizen. As far as I know, the Canadian Communist Party is only open to Canadians. Why would I be a member of that?
Now, don't be silly. I think you know that I'm referring to the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, you mean the Communist Party of China? The CPC, right? I misunderstood you. No, I don't think I'm affiliated in any way, although my wife is. So I guess there's a connection there. She has two family members who are party members. I didn't learn about that until we'd been married over 10 years. It certainly wasn't important. And there was no connection at all, as far as I'm aware. There was no connection between their membership and my social media presence. They can't read, write, speak, or even understand English. So everything I say and do online is in English. And I guess the simple answer is no, I'm not affiliated.
Fernando, not letting you off the hook. I bet you are affiliated with the CCP. I bet you've even received money from them, haven't you?
No, Ian, I have no connections to the Colombian Communist Party. Listen, I left Colombia over 20 years ago, and by the way, over there is called the CCP, right? Not the CPC. But let's talk about the CPC, the Chinese one, shall we? The CPC and me. Here's the story. So listen, my company provided language consultancy for my local government, Dongguan, when they participated and actually they won. Very proud of that. The United Nations IFPRA Livable Communities Competition back in 2008 and later on 2006 and 2008. Now, my company also provided translation services in the Dongguan section of what is called the Guangdong Greenway Project back in 2011. In both cases, we charged the government the same as our hourly teaching rate. I got the receipts to show if anybody wants them. But the biggest reward for me in both of these projects was learning how much work and effort actually goes into developing and running a city of 10 million people. During these projects, we had to visit every single town and district in the city, and we needed to research and write about their practices from environmental protection to city planning, city management, cultural heritage protection, community involvement, vision for the future. I mean, I learned about all of these things during this 11-month project. And we'll seeing this up close and extrapolating that to 1.4 billion people who actually get water when they open a tap, or who have electricity at the flick of a switch, or who can actually sell their produce no matter where they live in the country by using a phone and 5G. All of these things gave me a sense of appreciation for the work that the CPC does. And ultimately, it gave me a sense of belonging here in China. Now, much later, in 2017, I began making videos about teaching in China. But that quickly turned to a different topic, which was correcting misleading information about China that I saw on YouTube. So it became kind of like a mission. Doing that work, the only payment that I have ever gotten from my channels is AdSense. And anybody who buys me a cup of coffee, which we're working on getting for this channel, so please bear with us. I was discovered, so to speak, by state media. And they offered to show me more things to share with my audience. To me, that was never paid. It was never paid for my work or my time, only the logistics. And it was a fair trade because I got access to some amazing things, brick and mortar things that I could show, projects that were related to poverty alleviation, and that was awesome. Now, in 2021, I was offered to host a few documentaries, and well, those media companies who gave me those gigs have paid for the work through my company. I have also have to say one thing. None of the content that I host for these media companies appears on my YouTube channel. It's work that does not belong to me. That's very important for people to understand. And also, I should mention that that income does not amount to not even 1% of my income from my regular job, even as a semi-retired individual, because it's work that is so sporadic and so irregular, so it doesn't really amount to all that much. Now, having said all that, I would like to refer our audiences to Noam Chomsky's BBC interview with Andrew Marr. He said at one point that his job wouldn't be his if he didn't have the positions that he has. And I agree with him. My position is of 100% support for whatever system is able to improve the lives of its people. I have no qualms with that position. But I would like to boomerang this question back to our audience. Consider the following thing. If you have ever worked legally in China, or if you have derived profits or benefits from products made in China, if you've bought products made in China, regardless of how anti-Chinese you have supported the CPC through your taxes and the money that keeps those factories open, which also pay taxes. So, Ian, next question, please.
So what you're saying here is basically not only does your company accept money from the Chinese Communist Party, but you also support the party through your taxes. Now, fine, you
So do
might
you
not.
guys.
So you might not be able, you might not have a choice as to whether you give money to the party through, say, taxes, but you do as to whether you receive it or not. Now, Jerry, I reckon you must be on the party payroll as well, aren't you? Come on, come clean.
No. The answer is no, Ian. The party has never directly put money into my bank account, but I have worked in schools and colleges as a teacher, and they're publicly owned. So does that mean I've been paid by the party? I guess in a roundabout way it does. Every foreigner who comes to China and works in a Chinese public school or college receives their payment from the Chinese government or from a Chinese government department. And the Chinese government is often defined, particularly by people in the West, as being the CPC. So I guess we all receive money from them. It's really just a question of interpretation. But no, I can categorically state I've never been paid directly by anyone from the Communist Party. I do all my social media on work online for no payment at all. And clearly there's no conflict there. But I wonder whether the same would apply when I write an article for a Chinese magazine about my bike rides, for example, traveling in China. Does that make me a CPC paid propagandist? And I write every month for a magazine in China called Global People. It's translated into Chinese and then published as a paper magazine. It's very influential in China, and it's only about traveling to different cities. I don't think many Westerners will ever see it, so I'm not propaganding outside. And I'd like to let the viewers decide whether that constitutes working for the Communist Party of China or not. I don't think so. But even if it does, my cycling tours around China and the cities I've visited, they aren't very good propaganda, especially when they're only published in Chinese in China. So I think the answer is no.
Yeah, but, it's propaganda all the same, Jerry. That's tantamount to an admission. We'll be sure to use that one against you at a later date, at a time of our choosing. But moving on, though, do you agree with the Trump administration and the Biden administration that the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur people, Jerry?
I've never seen that reported, Ian. Can you provide me with a link to where the State Department in either administration has actually said this?
This is in the mainstream discourse, Jerry. Experts, multiple eyewitnesses have all said that there is ample evidence to prove that this is happening. I mean, Fernando, you cannot have missed it, can you?
Look, I know that both Mike Pompeo and Antony Blinken have said this, but neither of them has been backed up by the legal teams that support them. I have a link right here. We're going to leave it in the comment section where the State Department legal team has said that the evidence falls short. So I have another link actually here to a joint declaration by the US, the UK, and the Canadian government, which does not even mention the word genocide in it. So, listen, I don't think the two secretaries of state are being honest in their choice of words, because what they say to the press and what is officially announced is that they suspect human rights abuses of some sort, but that they have actually never proven any, let alone a genocide.
Fernando, you can't deny that the United Nations organization has declared that a genocide was taking place in Xinjiang.
Well, as a matter of fact, I do, Ian. The United Nations wrote a report that used untested and uncorroborated witnesses. They also referred to incorrectly analyzed satellite imagery, and they misinterpreted supposedly leaked documents. They also refused to use the evidence that had been collected by Michelle Bachelet. She was the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time. And they released the report at midnight on the day which she left office, without her endorsement, without her signature, or even without a statement from her or her office. In fact, the report completely ignored that she had made a report to the press on the last day of her trip to China. And that verbal report that she gave to the United Nations several weeks later, where she had actually praised the Chinese government for their actions. So I don't know, and I can't explain why would the UN release a document that was not authorized by the High Commissioner at midnight on the last day of her tenure without including her views, her findings, and her approval of China's present actions. I sure have to leave it at that, to be honest. The audience will have to decide what they think about this. I also cannot explain why it was that Mrs. Bachelet agreed to hold an annual senior level meeting with China. But since she left, the Office of the UN High Commission on Human Rights has simply just not initiated a single meeting. What's wrong with that? She also made it very clear in an interview once she was leaving office that she had said all there was to say about China. In other words, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who actually visited Xinjiang and met with ordinary people, with members of the government, with religious leaders, with women's rights advocates, and even people who were supposedly caught up in this concentration camp narrative, she didn't feel there was a case of genocide. But I don't know, Jerry, you might be able to add something to this.
Well, I can a little bit, Fernando, because this coincides with my own personal views, having spent several weeks there in 2014 and again in 2019, both times during this so-called persecution or even genocide that was supposedly going on. I cycled through towns and villages. I met ordinary people. If there has been a genocide going on in Xinjiang, there's certainly no evidence of it actually in Xinjiang. But I think you, Fernando, have even more experience than me in the region. I've spent a total, I think, of about 5 weeks traveling through it on my bike. You did more, right?
Yeah, I actually spent, I've been there twice. First in 2021, which was a short visit to 3 cities. But in 2023, I spent 43 days in the region. I traveled up to 15,000 kilometers. I went to 40 different towns, villages, even little houses. And I did it all freely. I did it all in my car, in my RV trailer, where, well, you've seen my videos. That's where I shoot. And I was able to actually get in contact with people and talk to people and see how they live. And the main thing that I would like to say about this is when you compare some of the imagery that you see coming out of Gaza with the happiness and the peacefulness and the harmony that you experience in Xinjiang, then you have to start to ask questions. Where is this narrative coming from? It's not there. None of the allegations are there. Not forced labor, not genocide, not cultural genocide. It's a narrative. And the worst thing is when you actually catch some U.S. government officials actually saying that this is a tactic. And I'll show you something here on the screen that you will actually find very, very disturbing. It is a strategy by the United States to destabilize China, to destabilize Xinjiang. So there is no factual evidence. Nobody's showing us absolutely anything. And perhaps the biggest difficulty for China and for anybody who goes there is how do you prove a negative? You can only show the daily life. You can only show how people feel and live and yeah, but how do you show a negative? That's the biggest issue.
Well, I'm sure there's evidence there, but it must have been skillfully covered up and hidden by the cunning Chinese authorities. Definitely. Mind you, to be honest, though, it is fairly clear from satellite imagery that most of the buildings that we can see there that are supposedly so-called concentration camps or, internment facilities just look like, schools, shopping centers, or even factories. We'll revise that one.
Now, did you know that China has 56 ethnic minorities and that they made up to about 10% of the total population of the country? Now, anybody who knows anything about China knows this fact. However, many of these ethnic minorities have some autonomy in the regions where they are in the majority. But this is what most people don't know. The 5 autonomous regions of Guangxi, Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and Ningxia, plus 30 other autonomous prefectures, plus 120 autonomous counties, and now 71% of all ethnic minorities live in an autonomous region. and the regions total 64% of all of China's landmass. Now you know.
Let me ask you this, Jerry. There's no doubt that you live in an authoritarian state. It's communist China, after all. How do you reconcile the freedoms of the West against the authoritarianism of China?
China is a dictatorship. It's actually written into the constitution. But actually, it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. What does that mean? That means the people tell the government what to do. And if we look through the constitution, there are actually 19 references in all which state that the National People's Congress, which is elected by communities, has the right to remove people in all positions and at all levels. This means that if the people are not happy with the people they voted in, they can move to vote them out again. So Western media admits now that the intelligence gathering from inside of China is nothing like it once was. And Western experts, for example, Alex Joske of ASPI and Bethany Ellen Ibrahim of Axios, have indicated that this is the first time right now that the Politburo is stacked with loyalists. And what they mean is people who have the same goals, ambitions, and mindset about the direction of China. They share power in the 24-person, all men, Politburo, as well as the 8-person standing committee. So, yes, they are loyalists to two things. They're loyalists to the people and they're loyalists to the party. And what's wrong with that? What really upsets people in the West, especially the experts, is that there are no leaks, there are no sources for Western journalists to gain information. So when they don't know something, they automatically assume that it's the same as it would be in their countries. I can't understand why it is that Western media constantly asks Western experts about China, and presumably that's because Chinese experts would give them a more truthful answer that doesn't coincide with their narrative. In all honesty, China is safe, it's stable, it's environmentally improving in every aspect. The wealth of every person in China is improving too, and it's quite possible that entrepreneurs can get incredibly wealthy here. And as long as they don't try to dictate to the government things that benefit their own industries or their own wealth accumulation, then they're going to be left alone to get richer. And while they're doing that, they're benefiting the community and they're providing an incentive for other people who want to follow suit and get rich. So in short, if this is authoritarianism, it's definitely the right kind of authoritarianism. Things get done and the entire country benefits from it. So yeah, I'm in favor of this kind of authoritarianism, Ian.
Okay, so Fernando, since apparently there is now no genocide in Xinjiang, and we have been informed that it is not an authoritarian state, there must be some truth to the story that China has eroded the democratic freedoms that the people of Hong Kong have fought so hard to gain, mustn't there?
Well, Ian, I'm really sorry to disappoint you once again and our audiences, but no, that just is not true at all. First of all, there was no democracy in Hong Kong at any time up until a few years before the handover, when you think about that. At that time, the people were given the opportunity to vote for a person that was nominated as the chief executive by Chris Patten. The British nominated a person, and then the locals got to vote for the first time in 150 years of British administration for someone that had been selected. That was hardly democracy. There's a lot more democracy now, since anyone can actually self-nominate in regional elections. But as per the joint declaration, the CEO of the region is appointed by China. It is Britain that is actually changing the rules here. For example, there was an agreement that was lodged with the UN called the Sino-British Joint Declaration. When Britain changed its rules and departed from this agreement by changing who could have British national, it's called the overseas passports, and what they would be valid for, Hong Kong responded by declaring them as an invalid document for travel, plain and simple. Since the joint declaration clearly states that Hong Kong would be responsible for the issuance of travel documents after the handover. Makes sense, right? Now, the joint declaration is very clear that Hong Kong would administer itself with supervision from Beijing, and Beijing would be wholly responsible for matters of national security and defense in the region. But that also stated that Hong Kong would be responsible for executive, legislative, and judicial powers, which it still is. None of these things have changed, but national security law to prevent outside interference in local issues has been created. And this was agreed in the joint declaration and is actually written into the basic law. Furthermore, Ian, Article 23 of the Basic Law, which the joint declaration approved of, said that Hong Kong should create a law, and let me quote this verbatim. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall enact laws on its own to prohibit any act of treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Central People's Government or theft of a state secrets, to prohibit foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the region, and also to prohibit political organizations or bodies of the region from establishing ties with foreign political entities or organizations or bodies, whatever you want to call them. I'm really not sure how any country or any individual in the world could assert that the imposition of a national security law is anything other than what was agreed and was, in fact, about 20 years late, if you think so. So, yeah, sorry, Ian, this one is also wrong.
Well, I don't believe any of your pro-China spin. You've obviously been completely brainwashed. Freedom and democracy will prevail. Lovely. Well, thank you both very much for clarifying some of the burning issues pertaining to China, not least your own positions vis-a-vis the country. I look forward, of course, to our next discussion. Thank you out there for watching too. Feel free to comment, press the like button, share, and above all, subscribe to our channel. See you next time for more China insights on the 3Ms.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.